Designing a mobile app can be challenging, especially when you have multi-platform, iOS and Android. So, in my history, at StumbleUpon, we were kind of debating whether to go for, the OS system, patterns, or should we go, cross-platform, hybrid approach. So we chose a hybrid approach. I'll go into that later. So I'll jump right into this. So we have such an intimate relationship with our mobile devices. We expect them to be extensions of ourselves. So I don't know if you're like me, but the last thing that I reach for at night is my phone, probably to set my alarm or to catch up on my Instagram feed or all the feeds at the same time. And then in the morning, the first thing I reach for is my phone again, but I set it across from my bed so that I have to get up to turn off the alarm, or else I'm going to hit the snooze button repeatedly. So that's a learned behavior right there. So here we go. Dare I say Gapple, or maybe Goople or Poogle is more fitting. But in all seriousness, I think they share a lot of commonalities, and I'm going to explore those right now. So here we go. Here's my current app that I'm designing right now. It's called Jot. It's for high school students. You basically find all your friends from your high school, and then you can chat with them. You can kind of do video chat. You have an awesome profile. So here is the iOS version right here. We have sort of the standard convention tab bar, and just some actions at the top. For our Android design, we have the floating action button, Fab button, and we have the sort of top tab approach. And so for iOS, you kind of have to tap between these, and Android comes kind of system. The system is you can kind of swipe in between all of these, so you don't even have to tap these. Android users are just used to swiping through those. And I decided to throw in your profile right over here. So sometimes it's makes sense to break convention. Android material design sort of like outlines that you should only have one floating action button. So in defense of my design, there was only one action button, but this is another button that goes to your profile. But it's pretty exciting just to break the rules every now and again. So here we go, a common design language. So I'm creating a design language that sort of incorporates Apple's flat iOS design and also the material design, but it's unique enough so that you can tell that you have a distinctly branded app. So play by the rules in the beginning when you're just getting your legs in app design, but read up. I read the iOS guidelines. I read the material design guidelines back and forth. The material design guidelines I fell in love with. Nathan mentioned them before. But yeah, so in the beginning you play by the rules, and then you kind of learn when to break them. So here's StumbleUpon. This was the app I was designing last year, and here we kind of have like a tabbed approach. This is a segmented control for iOS. Here's all your interests. So these are all the interests that you're currently following. And here we go as material design. So kind of a similar approach. This also has a swipe mechanism. We have the tab bar to, it's pretty much analogous to the segmented control right up here. So what icon color should you choose for, what color should you choose for your icon? This is a great question. So brand recognition is super strong because like when you open your phone, you like associate, red with Google and you associate, or blue with Google actually. And then you associate yellow with Snapchat. So it really depends. If you want to play it safe, you like to follow the crowd, then I would say go for blue or red. Red is Airbnb. So the usual suspects. The differentiator is, maybe you can go green, not the most popular, but you still aren't being too risque. And then the rebel, I like to be rebellious a little bit. So you go for bright pink, purple, yellow. Jot's app color is bright green, so it's really in your face. But yeah, just really find the color that speaks to your demographic. If you're designing a cool hip app for young kids, maybe the bright color is right. If you're designing an app for older, older audience, then maybe the bright color is not exactly the right choice. Okay, here we have so these are the top 200 free apps on the color wheel. So you can just kind of get a general picture of what's going on here. We have a lot of blue, and then we got some red, and their Snapchat is just owning yellow. We got green down here. Hulu is pretty much owning that. So you can kind of get a general glimpse of the hot apps. Lyft is going over here with the pink. There's a strong affinity for that. I don't know what other app besides that uses that, except for maybe Virgin. So that's kind of a cool little direction. So we have monochromatic color schemes, and those are made up of different tones, shades, and tints within a specific hue. We have analogous color schemes, and these are created colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. So they work really well together because they're right next to each other. They're like kissing cousins, they're buddies. So stick with colors that are specified in your branding guide. This will help with consistency going across when you're working across different platforms. So here is a color branding that we were working with at StumbleUpon, and we kind of have our primary colors up here, and here's our secondary colors. We have a lot of secondary colors. I love a lot of colors. It really depends on your audience, though. The primary colors are going to be the ones that really drive and reinforce that brand identity. So iconography. So one method is to sort of style icons for the respective platforms. So iOS uses a lot of hollow icons. Material kind of uses big chunky icons. That's what I did for StumbleUpon. Or you can just create another approach. You can use the standard icons for material design. This it's probably going to be the easiest because you don't have to go in and design individual icons. But if you want to create some, if you want to create a really cool app that has a really great style and personality, then by all means go and create your own awesome iconography that kind of lives across both. I mean, that would be my best recommendation, because then you create a cohesive platform, and it's just easier when you're working in the design, so you don't have to be looking for the specific icon for the platform. I think there's some interesting apps, like Swarm is a really cool one that has a lot of cool icons in it. Foursquare as well. They have some great design, and they do that. So material design. So it's really a lot of colors. I love it. We got a lot going on in material design. I'm a big fan. So they choose paper as the metaphor. They give interactions a strong tie to the physical world. This concept is trying to connect the core design principle of material design with the everyday objects and materials we encounter. So material is the metaphor, and material is also an object, a real everyday object. So here is a kind of diagram breakdown I did for StumbleUpon, and this is kind of like an explosion of awesomeness, and we got layers upon layers. And so right down here, I was working with web views, and so we would basically just pull in awesome content from the web, and we had those stacked up on top of each other. So we would preload those, and as you're swiping in that kind of carousel-like view, we would have one of the papers come on top of it. So we're creating that metaphor, and here are the different preview for the website in case the website was taking too long to load. We already had that going on, and then we have a lot of different stuff going on, navigation, and then the status bar, and here's the floating action button on the very top. My favorite, Fabs. They're fabulous. So a user interface is like a joke. If you have to explain it, it's not that good. I live kind of by this rule of thumb, just because if you have to explain it at all, then you're going to lose your audience. I mean, it's good to have a first-time user experience, don't get me wrong. But after you get past the first-time user experience, then it's awesome if you can just get it, like that joke. So gestures are the new tap. Most apps are relying on gestures beyond the tap for their primary interactions. Think about Tinder, think about Tinder, really. The number of gesture interfaces on today's screen is growing. Pinch, zoom, a long press, force touch, swipe menus, pull to refresh, flingable cards, edge wipes, and draggable side menus are now the norm. So the takeaways from this are to enforce more consistency, align with natural actions, and include clear cues. All right, may the Force Touch be with you. So Apple is awesome. They had Force Touch, and now they have 3D Touch. That kind of confused me when that first happened. And they still kind of have both of those going on. But Force Touch has less capability to measure your touches and presses and doesn't react as quickly to your input. Whereas the new 3D Touch is kind of really highly sensitive, so you don't have to like hold it down to get that Force Touch. The analogous would be also long press on Android, so you hold it down for long, but they don't have a 3D touch, which is Apple has patents for that, and it kind of allows for different levels of actions based on how firmly you press. So that's a pretty cool gesture we have here. So here are some awesome gestures. This is one of my favorite apps, Clear. This is kind of using a more analogous color scheme, kind of on the color wheel from red to yellow. They have awesome colors going on. Here's a 3D Force Touch on your Apple Watch to get your heartbeat going on. You can rotate some stuff, swipe and drag. There's like an alarm clock, so you can be like, this is 6 a.m., and then you go down to 12 p.m. I think that's rise. And then Peak is really cool. They have an interesting interaction where you can kind of cover to reveal specific attributes of the UI. So they're like inventing new awesome gestures. So go out there, be a rebel, create some awesome interactions. This is a real life interaction. It's not even on mobile, but this is kind of cool. So you can go on and off just to do that. Pretend the light's going on and off, and then dim or brighten. So here we go. Design at 1x. So this is kind of, this is awesome because it's a 1-to-1 ratio between your pixel densities on Android and iOS, so you don't have to do math. Less math, the better for your engineers and for you, especially for you, because they're going to have to do math anyways. Smaller file sizes and better performance. So if you're creating a 1x, you can just scale up your icons super easily. So you can just be like 1x, at 1x, at 2x, at 3x, and then at infinity x whenever we get there. So you don't have to like be thinking, whenever Apple or Android comes out with another pixel density, which is assuredly going to happen. So it's also future-proof. Design at 1x defends you against Apple or Google. I mean, I pretty much just said that, but like it's 1x is timeless. That's all I'm trying to say. So if you have the opportunity to design 1x, do it. I've designed in both 1x and 2x, so you're not gonna make or break you, but I would recommend 1x. So here's kind of like the exporting from Sketch, my favorite app. Probably all of yours too. I know there's probably some Photoshop users, but that's or XD users, I should say. So from 1x, you have simple at 1x, at 2x. But if you're doing at 2x, you have to do like 0.5x for 1x because you're dividing. You're at 2x, so you have to divide your export by 2. So here's the math that's really fun that you can avoid. And so it becomes analogous to your Android exports, which is cool. So at 1x would translate to like XDPI. Okay. So touch areas. So in mobile environments, use large elements when you can. Like the larger the touch area, the easier it's going to be for the people using your apps. So basically at iOS, use 44 by 44 pixels at 1x, and then at Android, it's 48 by 48. They have even bigger touch areas. It's like material design is even trying to one-up Apple. Go figure. They used to love each other. Now, not as much. Concise and contextual. Mobile mediums require variety and context so that your methods should be tailored with this in mind. So as concise as your designs can be to convey the interactions, the better. So describe all those functionality that you need to do on a need-to-know basis. Sort of like what Nathan was talking about copywriting, like brevity, shortness is better. Get rid of that redundancy. and trim copy to be as short as possible. I'm not going to go into that because we just did that. But here is sort of like Google, their app. I like their app because it's very contextual. I can bring it up right now, and I could probably look at the Warrior score, but I don't need to because I know they're going to win because they're so good. So here we go. You have your flights tracking. Like I use Google a lot. I'm sure all of you do too. So here are some pro tips. So use awesome naming conventions. When you're exporting assets for developers, stick to layer names that match your naming conventions. Like icon dash, icon dash navigation dash, whatever you're going to do, or your top tab bar. Stick to those patterns. Use text styles when you can. Create symbols for repeating UI elements, and you can create an awesome style guide. That's what we did at StumbleUpon. We did a awesome live style guide, and so that live style guide was living and breathing, and we were adding to it every day, every other day, and that made it super easy for our developers. And so artboards are cool too. Doing this will help you, focus on the big picture. I like to think about the big picture because a lot of times you get caught in the weeds, and nobody wants to be in there, even though we did get legalized. You still don't want to go down there. All right. Developer-friendly specs. So ask the engineer what they're looking for in a spec. I used to have to do like red lines by hand. Material has a lot of that stuff pre-built in there. So that's, at Jot, we got on board with material design recently, and that's just made it so much easier for our developers to not having to be like copying our iOS design. So they're using the sort of the native patterns, and it just has sped up development time a lot. Zeppelin IO, we use that with our Android team, and so that kind of communicates all the different ratios that they need. It pretty much does all the map, and it also exports Android assets. I used to have to do figure out all that, and then they introduced that, and I was like, oh my god, I don't have to do all the math to figure out what pixel density. Inspect is another tool by InVision, and that just came out, and it kind of supports your team's transition from design to engineering. So it's kind of cool because you can create a prototype, and then you can just give that over to the engineers, and they can, the conversation is basically changed because of that. Team members can focus on bigger problems because Inspect handles the important details. All right, bots. So conversational UI is in. I'm sure you've ran into some bots in your day. They're appearing as kind of a new type of conversational tool. It's a way to browse the internet. Aside from reasoning, the reasoning we just walked through, there's also the facts. Bots are really great to bookmark things. So basically, it pushes actionable content. A lot of times, we've been kind of pulling all that data from all these different resources, and now basically you can push that. So bots are able to kind of build these awesome experiences that, and everything from booking reservations to buying goods without leaving, social messaging apps. Messaging apps are kind of taking over in terms of the primary apps that people use. It's like iMessage, Messenger, or Jot. So here we go. The average person only uses 4 to 6 apps every day. Although the average smartphone has 27 apps on their phone, they typically only use 4 to 6 of those every day. And then at the end of 30 days, only 3% of all apps retain their new users. So, a lot of, it's great to build your own ecosystem, but it's also great to extend that ecosystem. So if you are building a bigger app, then you can push content, not just in your platform, but through Messenger or through Kik. So here's an example of the bot that I built. This is a more simple. Yeah, so basically this is an onboarding experience that we built out, and we were able to educate our users on what our app was, because before it's like, kids really didn't know what they're getting themselves into the experience. and we were able to kind of create a really friendly tone. So our hypothesis was that it was drive engagement and retention, and so we've seen increase in both of those. So the conversions on onboarding are obviously the most important thing because you're trying to get them to sign up for your app. So if you can do that as speedily as possible, we pretty much made it super concise. We had a really full bloated bot, trying to tell you everything, and now we're just giving you the need-to-know basis. And then we actually continue the bot experience. So you get into the app, and then we have that bot, and he'll ask you, for your, what usernames. Like you can go to our Jot and you can find somebody's Snapchat or Instagram username. So he'll basically pushing you information. You just type it in really quickly, and then it fills out your own profile. So bots are awesome. So here's an example of a bot, and this is awesome because it's really chatting. It's creating a conversational tone, and it's really it creates these very actionable items. So this is the Go Vote bot. So this is a super easy way to just kind of register to vote. And then here is an example where the bot is kind of trying to play smarter than the human, and it's it's kind of, don't do that. Like, don't try to convince your users that the bot is smarter than them, because you don't want to make your users like sound dumb.
So no unsolicited advice, right?
Yeah, no double guessing the user, because the user is always right. Yes.
Sorry, for the last one, I have a question.
Sure.
Is that in the app or is that a text message?
This is in Messenger. This is in Bot Messenger. So Messenger has a platform where you can actually design your own chatbot. Kik also has their chatbot marketplace. So these are a lot of familiar like H&M, a lot of familiar brands have chatbots now where you can just go purchase or order Lyft or Uber right from the chatbot. Yeah, don't inundate your users with too much information with your chatbot. I mean, I know there's a chatbot that would basically be like, oh, if you want me to automatically ping all your friends on their birthday and do all these things for you, that's an interesting idea. I don't know. I don't think I would want a random bot chatting for me though. So I think there's better applications. All right. So apps are dead. So this is actually this is just the adage, like old adage, that web versus app debate. So on one side, you have the number of new apps downloaded per person is shrinking fast. Repeat usage is limited to a certain type of app. Usage is made up of small chunks of time. The web, but I would argue that long live apps, because really the web is kind of the glue that binds both of them together. So a lot of times in apps you're actually using web views like you didn't even know, like Facebook Instant Articles. It's like the web right there, and you can actually do a lot of cool things with the web inside of these native app experiences. So you can do really cool things that you couldn't even do on web browsers. So apps have captured people's imagination so far. We should build upon those learned behaviors, understand them, tweak them, improve them to drive more value out of the experiences we're designing for. Let's focus now on these habits, and let's learn about the different target markets and build upon the most popular elements that have worked so far. So let's make sure the app itself can live and become a huge, and also I think the main goal of any app is to become a global, to create a global ecosystem that has a strong revenue stream and has killer distribution. So I think the web can coexist with apps as well. There are different tools out there that are that I'm not going to go into right now, but that are using web. Pretty much they're using native controls and they're wrapping the web experience with the native, but it's all web. So there are case in points where it can be used, but yeah, sure, yeah, like. Oh, I mean, I would say vice versa. I would say it's more like we have the, here's a navigation bar for iOS, and then we're just, we're using navigation iOS standard paradigms, and then we're wrapping web containers, web views inside of those. So I was doing that at StumbleUpon. So there's a lot of instances where you can use both. So transform the noise into the signal. Make the interface part of the goal so you can capture people's attention and create worthwhile experiences that value users' attention spans. The noise can become the signal. As a designer, it's best to imagine your users are people who are super busy. And what actually matters the most now is that that for all these products, not just mobile apps, it's something that people really want. So you're trying to design a painkiller, something that solves a real problem on a regular basis. So you want to push boundaries. The only way we can push them is to innovate by creating creative risks. New and inspiring work gives others a spark to push their boundaries. Even if you're compelled to follow a layout or style trend, just add a touch of your creativity so you can make it unique. Be authentic. Fads come and go. In the last 5 years, we've gone through kind of Web 2.0 skeuomorphism to flat design, and that's kind of taken the rage, and now it's like radiant flat design is coming along. We're really in like kind of a post-flat world, actually. Material design kind of took flat to the next level. And there's been a bunch of micro fads in between. So maybe skew flatism is the next one. The only way we can push forward though is innovate and inject some personality and give your products a soul. I created a really awesome personality, and I'm super happy we're with Jot just because it really speaks to our users. Super fun and bubbly personality. So that's been a fruitful effort. So that's not the web. That's the web. It's like everywhere. Will this be the web? I think we'll see apps that live in the background, anticipating our needs based on sensor and contextual data, and do things for us before we even have to ask. I envision a more elegant place for apps within the ecosystem of services, or natural interfaces. Think Siri or Google Now or Alexa, Amazon's home service. And so it's kind of like the next wave for app creation. And so don't be stuck in the past. So make the back of the fence look as beautiful as the front. Even though others won't see it, you'll know it's there. And that will make you more proud of your design. Steve Jobs. So even if your users can't see the back of your back end, make it work well because you're going to run into problems if you don't put enough attention. Your style guides, all of that nitty-gritty stuff that you put in the forefront is going to make the experience, and it's going to make your app design kind of flawless going forward. Maybe not flawless is not the right word, but it's going to make it more cohesive and consistent. All right, that is it for me. Any questions? Are you seeing that in iOS?
Yeah, I've seen them. I see it.
To close out like a modal, or?
Yeah, or to close out information. Maybe
instead of a back button?
Find you
Sure.
an example.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're just presenting the user with like some type of overlay information and you're not necessarily like coming from anywhere, then you can do an X to get out of that. But if you're like clicking a button to get to a screen, you should probably have a back button. On iOS, on Android, the back button is built in to the native platform, so that gesture is already built into the hardware in itself, so you don't even have to put a back button necessarily.
So what are the core differences between the Android and iOS?
Sure, yeah. So I would say navigation is a big one. Like Fab buttons on Android are really awesome.
What is it?
The floating action buttons. So you can click a floating action button and that's the main action on the screen. It's a circle, so I think it drives a lot of attention. It really gets you. It looks different than a square button or a label. Oftentimes they're also accompanied by labels. After you tap a fab button, then it can kind of open up into more fab buttons, or it can just do like the main action on that screen.
And I'm going to ask one more question.
Yeah, I think learning the best. I mean, from the material guidelines, it's like you can learn the Android app right there. I mean, it's always great to, if you have an app, then it's always great to test it on the actual hardware itself. The material guidelines are so robust, though, that it's they're even better than the iOS guidelines just because it's so visual and it's live. They're updating it all the time. So I think it's, option A, get an Android device or get your company to buy you one. They're also really cheap, Android devices compared to iOS devices. So you can find one on eBay, like super cheap compared to iOS.
Some of the people at Facebook, they switch their. Where do you start?
Okay, so you're starting off. You have an iOS app, or you're starting scratch. So you have the iOS app, and you want to do multi-platform across iOS and Android. So I'm classically an iOS user, so I start off in iOS. And I kind of transpose my designs into Android. You could start the other way around, though. You could do Android if you're an Android designer and go to iOS. The platforms, the guidelines are, you'll have like a segmented control in iOS, and then you'll have a tab. You would have a tab, bar in Android. So there's patterns that actually match up really well. They just have a different styling. And they function a little bit different. So basically, if you have your iOS design, you're super comfortable with that, then you can kind of take a look at the guidelines and just be like, just search on the guidelines. You will find the pattern that matches that. And if there isn't a pattern, then you can make it up. But the chances of that happening are very low because material design has pretty much every pattern on iOS. Would you ever hide a feature that you design on iOS on the Android platform or vice versa? Typically, you can find a way to integrate that feature across two platforms. Sometimes, there are specific features that are iOS only, so then you would only design the iOS feature, like an extension bar, or there are specific features that are only for iOS, but for the most part, you can pretty much parlay them like back and forth. But there are some specific, if you're going to do an Android widget, iOS doesn't have that. Well, actually, iOS does have widgets now, but they're not on the home screen. They're in your pull down. So they are kind of similar, but I could see specific circumstances where you would only design like an extension widget for Android.
3D touch. Do they have 3D touch on Android?
They just have long press, so that kind of acts as a force touch. But not to my knowledge, Android doesn't have 3D. I mean, 3D touch is kind of proprietary to Apple, yeah. So I'm sure they're working on something. So the question was, how do you go about, recreating an app on, multiple platforms, specifically if there are different flows and different interactions that you need to use. So, going into that, there are different interactions. I was saying the force, the long press is going to act differently in Android, and that's like the go-to. So a lot of times you can obfuscate different, different parameters in Android, like the swiping. You can redo that. So there are different paradigms that you do have to redesign around. So Android, it's awesome. I was showing the concept of you can kind of swipe in between screens. So that's we designed specifically for that, and we took certain measures to really get that interaction down, and that really influenced the whole navigational system. So that was different than iOS. A lot of times the flows will be very similar, but the interactions, like the micro interactions, I find are more different. So for the micro interactions, I'll either prototype that specifically for both platforms, and then I'll also sometimes the interactions will be different. They'll lead you down a different path. So a lot of times the flow will be the same, and then it'll diverge on iOS, it'll diverge on Android, but usually it'll converge at the same ending point. So there will be, you will have to design a different flow for each platform respectively. But
Does everybody know what a micro interaction is? Definition for your phone and
Mhm.
what people love the apps.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think the conventions are different, and I would recommend going with a different kind of convention on Android specifically, or respectively on iOS. And I think that's it's going to make it easier for developers to develop on Android if you go like fully material, because they already have like the prepackaged patterns, and you don't have to recreate those patterns that you're using on iOS and those different elements. So I think it's going to speed up the production time to redesign more specifically geared for Android. It really depends on the level of complexity of your app. So there's some apps that really don't differ too much. If you look at Snapchat, it really doesn't differ that much. They use the same. They use a more hybrid approach. So StumbleUpon, we really used a hybrid approach. So we were able to use a lot of the same flows and patterns. And with Jot, it's more of a there's some instances it really depends on your specific app. So if you feel the urge that like, oh, the Android, if my flow is so complicated or complex that in those user tests they're not getting it, then I would say fully go into material design and really get into those interactions and develop a different flow for each respective platform. Thank you so much. Mhm.
No, everybody, give it up.
Mhm.
Great.